Welcome. My name is Lois Svoboda, and I'm the facilitator for this part of the session, which is entitled Psychopathology of Cultic Group Leaders and Implications for Victims. There will be two discussions, two papers read, and then some discussion. There will be questions and answers after the second paper's been read. And if you wish to stand up and ask questions, that's possible, but preferably write your questions out so that we don't have a recording and a hearing problem. I am here as the discussant or the facilitator of the discussion. I'm a family doctor and a family therapist, and have worked for about 20 years with people coming out of cults. Certainly not exclusively. I had a general marriage and family therapy practice before I retired 2 years ago. I also am getting ready to celebrate our 20th anniversary of a successful intervention of an adult child from a cult, from a high energy group, high authority group, 20 years ago next September. She still celebrates, pardon me for using this word, deprogramming day on Labor Day every year. My two fellow discussants are Dr. John Burke, who is a postdoctoral resident at the Autism Spectrum Disorders Clinic at Kaiser Permanente Health Management Organization in San Jose, California. He has a very varied background. He's a psychologist, Ph.D. He's also a Presbyterian pastor. He's also worked in a variety of settings with children of all ages and with adults, including in prisons. More, I should say. Okay. The second speaker will be speaking about the effect of cults on victims, particularly of the cult leaders. It's Lorna Goldberg, who is a psychoanalyst in private practice in Teaneck, New Jersey, and has run an ex-cult member support group for almost 30 years. And I have known her for 20 years. And she has published a lot of papers, and if you haven't heard of her, then you haven't read the story. Just a few words before Dr. Burke talks. There have been numerous studies of people who got into high authority groups. Lots of in-depth psychological studies by people like Paul Martin at Wellspring and by others, many professionals who do counseling with such people. And there have been studies of large groups of them so that we have some profiles of the kinds of people that get pulled in and how they get changed and what the changes are and what they have facing them when they come out, which is formidable. There's not that kind of in-depth study of cult leaders. What we have is an opportunity to look at their actions and judge by their actions and their behaviors what they've done, and then take guesses at what's going on inside their heads. As a therapist, I've always wondered what makes people act the way they do. We don't have that information. We have speculation about that information. But that's what this next hour and a half is going to be about. There's been lots and lots and lots of books, many of which you can buy out at the book table, written by ex-members about their experience and about what went through their minds and bodies and relationships as a result of their experience. Cult leaders don't write books, and they don't take psychological tests. And so Other people do write books about them, and there are some notable ones around. If you log on to Wikipedia, you can read the biographies of 25 current cult leaders, all of which become boringly similar after a while. They've all had a deprived childhood, not enough love, often an absent father, and often failed at many things before they discovered that they could succeed at one thing, in their terms. I think I'll turn the talk over now to Dr. Burke.
Thank you, Lois. I think we should give her a hand. Well, I see there's a good group of people here. I'm going to try to speak loudly. I'm going to try to keep you awake. However, I just want to say, as I get started here, the theory can be dense. This morning I was crossing out adjectives. And I got rid of some of them, but there's still some left. So I'm going to try to do something. I'm going to try to talk about antisocial personality disorder in cult leaders. As Dr. Lois Svoboda has stated, they don't hang around and take our clinical psychology tests like we would like them to. They like to work with people like us and make us the guinea pig, and they want to be the person doing the manipulation. I guess that's what some of the fascination is for me. About 3 years ago, I was inside as a working person, the Colorado State Penitentiary, and I was working with a personologist who works a lot with antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and his comment was kind of interesting to me. He said, "They don't play well with others." Indeed, they don't. This is kind of a warm-up. Is this interesting to you?
Yes.
Okay. This is in a penitentiary near you. I walked by a cell that had a lot of guys in it, young people, by the way, mostly young, and I heard a lot of barnyard epithets. And so these are not nice people, but they are people. And so I'm going to punctuate this talk from time to time, observing good time limits. We want to hear from Lorna Goldberg because she has a lot of therapy experience, and I'm going to try to cut right at the half hour? I'll go for about a half hour. We're going to give you some time to ask questions, and then I've come over 1,000 miles to be here, as well as be at Estes Park. And I will be available after the session if you want to continue this discussion. I'd be happy to. Well, part of my background you didn't hear. I taught college for 8 years in substance abuse studies. Also worked with people for a long time. So let's get started. A number of studies have reported ex-cult member eyewitness accounts of antisocial acts and behaviors by cult leaders. Martin, Langone, Dole, Wiltrout, Tobias, Weston, Martin. There's a whole group of books outside where you can read about this if you want to read details. You may have details yourself which have not been published. I'm not even going to argue whether these things happen or not. I think it's well established. I'm going to try to go to a different perspective. These studies report firsthand evidence of antisocial acts and behaviors by cult leaders towards cult members. I've also observed a cult leader at work, David Burke. I'll be talking about him a little bit later during the session. I want to use diagnostic criteria which are found in the DSM-IV TR, which is the latest manual. You can find it in any large bookstore, to help us characterize the personality organization of the cult leader. I have been involved in team assessment of criminal personalities in the Colorado and the California penal system, so I have some experience of what an antisocial personality looks like. The studies which are on the tables outside and are on the website talk about mistreatment, psychological manipulation, physical and sexual abuse of cult members by cult leaders. And these accounts have what caused me to begin to develop a hypothesis about an antisocial cult personality organization. That's what I want to talk about this morning. Now, just an aside, before I put this paper together completely, it was suggested to me that I should talk about narcissistic personality organization. And indeed, this is a dangerous personality organization if it's in a cult leader. I'm not going to talk about that today because it would take yet another hour just to talk about that. I'm just going to focus on antisocial personality disorder and a little bit on psychopathic personality disorder, which is not in the DSM-IV, but which is used in the community. Now, Milan, who is one of the more astute psychologists who are busy looking at personality disorders, talks about two types of antisocials, a type A and a type B, we might say. He says purer, quote-unquote purer, antisocials are quickly discerned. You can figure out who they are pretty quickly. You don't need a lot of extensive evaluation. But those who are devious and perhaps hide their ways a little bit are harder to understand who they are. The second group has high scores on Milan's personality inventory on the narcissistic scale and the antisocial scale. And I'll just say in passing that some antisocials can also be classified as narcissistic personality disorder. So you could have both in the same individual. They share some characteristics. Now, for the second group of antisocials, the devious ones we might call them, the antisocial scale, the aggressiveness scale are elevated beyond a base rate of 75. That means that this is clinically significant. And if you work with any sort of personality inventories, when you see a base rate of 75 or greater, that is clinically significant. We start thinking about maybe this person has the disorder which is being described. Now, from a sample population which I have, which is rather large, 25% of the people with antisocial personality disorder also have narcissistic personality disorder. So there is some overlap. I'm going to talk about antisocial a little bit. It's a related cluster of traits. One trait is dominance, which is exerting influence or control over others. Another trait is aggressivity, which is verbal or physical aggressiveness, acts towards others. Blackburn says that sometimes aggressivity goes along with impulsiveness. That sounds like a fairly dangerous combination to me. Someone who's impulsive and aggressive. Now, a single act of aggression does not make up aggressivity. I have a feeling that everyone in this room at one point or another did something aggressive towards someone else. But when you have a continued pattern of aggressivity towards others, then you have the trait which is oftentimes found in antisocial personality disorder. It could be verbal aggressiveness, or it could be physical. It could be both. Now, if you look at Milan's dimensional perspective on personality disorders, he talks about antisocials as being active, independent type of people. Active means just exactly what it sounds like. They are busy. Independent means that they don't ask my opinion or your opinion when they want to do something. Now, if you think about cult leaders, that makes sense. They gather a community around them, and they are pretty much independent. and they pretty much set the rules. These are people who interact with others. We're not talking about wallflowers. Now, active independents seek to shape the social world of others. Isn't that a nice way of putting it? They actively intrude upon and violate the rights of others. They transgress established social codes through deceitful or illegal behaviors. Page 460, Milan's large book on the personality disorders. Also, they have a self-focused dimension, not other-focused. Now, if you have a family, I hope that you are other-focused when you're looking at your children and caring about them. You're thinking about what's important to them, not what's important to you. Other-focused people, antisocials, consume resources upon themselves. They manipulate others, trying to satisfy their personal needs and desires. Finally, Milan says they have a pleasure-seeking dimension. They seek to avoid pain. Many antisocials possess a lust for life, a passion which they are willing to seek excitement and hedonistic pleasure. This pleasure-seeking dimension in an antisocial might work out like this. They might tell members of a cult that they cannot marry or have personal relationships, and then you read about them, you see them engaging in sexual relationships with members, young and old, married or unmarried. Pleasure-seeking is part of the package. An antisocial is manipulative. They have self-focused behaviors, not pro-social behaviors. Morality, fairness, and justice are not part of their makeup. Now, antisocials do not avoid others. Rather, I like to use the image of a piranha evaluating the feet of swimming tourists in the local river. They and the cult leader are evaluating the group of people to take care of their personal needs. When an outside observer observes an antisocial, the perspective and the action seems to be based on principles that are diametrically opposed to the best principles of society. According to Hare, who has written a book called Without Conscience, Hare is one of the major leaders in the field of antisocials and especially psychopaths. There's a group of 3 out of 10 antisocials who should also be classified as psychopaths. So if you have a group of people in a room, maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100, 2 out of 100 might be antisocials, maybe a few more. But out of that group, 3 out of a group of 10, he says, should be classified as psychopathic. These people have severe personality deficits. The antisocial, the psychopath, may not have a lot of empathic identification with you. However, what's interesting is they can read you. They study people. But they don't study people's hearts in the sense, they don't make the heart-to-heart connection. But they know what makes people work. That's where the danger is. A person who is a psychopath or is antisocial personality disorder in a cult group is going to be dangerous to the people around them because they can read those people. They are masters of knowing people. Psychopaths seem to act without restriction of conscience or restraint of morals. Now, psychopathy, Hare says, is not limited to criminal populations. It can affect any walk of life. In fact, Hare and Babiak's May 2006 book came out last month. It's titled Snakes in Suits When Psychopaths go to work. Great. Maybe we should write another book, When Psychopaths Go to Cults. Now, if you are trying to identify a psychopath, they can be identified by their actions. For instance, the Jim Jones cult, where almost 1,000 people died. The impact has been very great. Recently, a group of survivors on the West Coast wrote a play commemorating their family members. This is many years later. It opened in May 2005 in San Francisco. A friend of mine saw it. Studies of these individuals show people who lack genuine empathy. They seem to be able to read emotional feedback from others, but they have a defective capacity for real empathy with others. They turn their understanding of others to their own advantage. For instance, they can use your financial resources and then tell you that, well, I'm really sorry they're gone. They can establish a relationship with someone, physical or sexual relationship, and then when they've taken care of their needs, they can walk away with no feelings, apparently. Unfortunately, psychopaths and antisocials seek out to prey on the weak and the needy, and they go where people are. When an antisocial psychopath decides to enter a cult, they may initiate a power struggle with existing leadership. They may cultivate a cadre of loyal followers who will support their decisions and actions. They may have a glib and superficial manner, which is different than the personality style of a normal. A normal person is characterized by genuine open communication on good days and a desire for growing relational depth with others, not influenced all the time by ulterior motives. Normals who enter a cult may quickly discover they must leave right away, and it's estimated around 10% leave pretty quickly, or accept the leadership style of the cult leader. Once the cult leader is in place, he uses tactics, or she uses tactics, of control and manipulation to try to accomplish certain goals. Once you say yes, then there will be requests which are more and more centered around their needs and not your needs. For instance, the ability to visit friends and family outside the cult goes away. Personal freedom goes away. And there can be religious manipulative ceremonies such as incessant chanting, fasting, other types of things, which basically keep you from normal activities, rest, relaxation, and keep you from being able to maintain focus. One of the things that happens when people are abused in a cult by an antisocial cult member is disassociation, splitting. This only happens under extreme trauma and stress. All of us have the ability to kind of go to a place in our minds where we're kind of safe and it feels good. Imagine having to do that day after day, month after month, maybe even year after year. Not helpful. Disassociation is an automatic, primitive, protective, psychological defense. It's actually something that's kind of hardwired into us. It's not supposed to be the way we live every day. One of the things that happens inside of cults is identification with the aggressor. It's a personal survival strategy. Anna Freud, in World War II, studied concentration camp survivors. Some of them teamed up with their aggressors. And Goring, who was a Nazi leader, actually had a whole army of subordinates who were busy causing people to follow his ways and act just like he was acting to the detriment of the people who are being acted on. Why does a cult leader act the way they do? Interestingly, antisocial personality disorder, for those who have it among cult leaders, not all do, but probably quite a few do, is stable in terms of personality organization. Not only that, but people feel okay when they have it. They're not going to walk into my office, not going to walk into a church, not going to walk into a legal, where a sheriff is or where a police officer is, and say, I've got a problem. And in fact, their self-opinion, according to Stanton Samanow, who's studied antisocials for many years, might be something like this. Nothing is wrong in my world. I'm in control of my world, and I like the way things are. And so they can quite busily be disrupting your world and turning it upside down, but they feel just great with no compunctions and everything's just fine. Samanow, in a public seminar here in Colorado Springs, talked about antisocial personality as trying to avoid a zero state of feeling low, powerless, and down, and manipulating others to avoid this zero state so they could achieve what they want, keep their mood up, even if their actions are violating your rights. Viewed from this perspective, it's clear that a cult leader understands what he's doing, or she's doing, when using a technique like love bombing, for instance, or concentrated, focused attention. Everybody responds to these types of techniques, especially people who are just coming into a group of people. Can you imagine being surrounded by a lot of love and attention? You're going to think very highly of the person who's giving you that care. But if it's used as a manipulative device to gain your attachment to the group, that's wrong. That's unethical. That's immoral. And as it turns out for many cult members, that's dangerous in the long term. Once inside the cult, once attached to the group leader and others, other emotional and psychological tactics can be used to break down remaining resistance to the will of the leader. Another thing that happens inside the group is the drying up of emotional safe havens in the cult. Constant loyalty checks make sure that the person doesn't have anywhere to turn to rebalance their life. There's a study by Milgram, a psychologist in California, some years ago, where he took college students at a university. Some were guards and some were prisoners. It's done down in the basement. Within 3 or 4 days, the guards were mistreating the prisoners. And the prisoners were starting to act craven and afraid and worried, and he had to stop the experiment. Misuse of authority by a cult leader has a lot of effect on the people who are experiencing the misuse of authority. Historically, accounts of emotional and psychological manipulation by cult figures have been reported as early as the 1st century AD. For example, the Christian writer Paul wrote to people in Corinth, said that there were religious leaders there who strike people in the face, oppress and exploit, and take persons to themselves. That was 2,000 years ago. Control of people can be also gained by forced public confessions of wrongdoing or wrong thinking, which, by the way, is a horrendous invasion of privacy. Also, the doctrine of the cult. People can be forced to constantly repeat the doctrine of the cult. Verbal and physical disciplining for whatever can be practiced. At the point where cult members are physically or sexually abused, or both, some may leave. Martin and others in 1992 found that ex-cult members whom they had treated had developed clinical levels of post-traumatic stress disorder, dependent personality disorder, depressiveness, and anxiety, as measured by the Milan Personality Inventory, which is very respected in the community. I just want to say something in terms of balancing. Contemporary religious or philosophical ideologies are not considered to somehow provide support for or legitimize the antisocial, illegal behaviors of cult leaders. Rather, it's the active, antisocial personality of the cult leader that particularizes the culture of the cult. In other words, it grows out of that person's ideas and practices. For example, the many independent house churches in the United States do not usually lead to the formation of cults. Rather, cults are more likely to develop their particular individualistic character under the active leadership of, for instance, a religious antisocial such as David Moses Burke of the Children of God. I saw David Burke in action some years ago. People walk into a storefront meeting. All of a sudden, they're being screamed at. Burke tended to use passages in the Old Testament that were pretty scary. The kids had never heard anything like that before. Many responded with a lot of fear, a lot of intimidation going on. Some of the kids, some of the young adults, some of the married family members who on the spot did whatever Burke said, probably underwent real religious conversion. I mean, they were acting out of good faith. However, some who were saved by the wolf ended up the wolf's dinner, as later nationally publicized accounts of what was really going on in the Children of God talked about. In contrast to legitimate religious leaders or other leaders, antisocial cult leaders can be distinguished by their mistreatment and abuse of followers. Instead of being responsible to people who genuinely want to join a cause, they engage in manipulation, domination, mistreatment. They seem to have an inexhaustible flow of an evil and self-serving impulse to control, abuse, dominate, and take advantage of unsuspecting cult member followers. Now I want to go through, just for about 3 minutes, some criteria that are found in the DSM-IV TR about antisocial personality disorder. Criteria 1, and you only need 3 to get a designation of antisocial personality disorder, all other things being equal. There's a pervasive disregard and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15 years, as indicated by 3 or more of the following criteria. Now let me say as a disclaimer, I don't have good history right now about what happens in the lives of teenage cult leaders. So I'm going to have to pass on that particular criteria. However, let's go to criteria 1. And there may be people here who have more information than I do. That's fine. You can study this all your life, and you're going to just know part of the puzzle. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. It's interesting to me that Dr. Oates did a study of religious personalities in cults. 3 of the 20 people that he studied were in jail at the time of his study. So I think in some cases we meet that criteria for illegal acts. Deceitfulness, criteria 2. As indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning for personal profit or pleasure. The individual elements of this criteria, which refer to repeated lying or conning others for personal pleasure, advantage, have been reported by ex-cult members. This criteria appears to be characteristic of some cult leaders. Number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. I don't have specific data on that. I will pass on that one. Irritability, criteria 4, and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Some cult members report that they have been physically abused and injured by cult leaders. Criteria then. Reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. I don't have enough data. Criteria 6. Consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. Cult leaders have been implicated in the lack of financial integrity, which includes lack of honoring financial obligations, fraud, misuse of monies collected for legitimate ministry needs. Happens. 7. Lack of remorse is indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Lack of remorse has been reported. Being mistreated has been reported or stolen from by ex-cult members. The individual is at least 18 years of age. Most are. There's evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15. I don't have specific data for that. And the occurrence of antisocial behavior is not during the course of schizophrenia or manic episode. In most cases, most cult leaders are not suffering from schizophrenia. Question of mania, there may be a few. Reported accounts seem to suggest that DSM-IV antisocial personality disorder criteria 2, 6, and 7, which are deceitfulness, failure to honor financial obligations, lack of remorse, are met for some of these individuals, which provides some evidence for antisocial personality disorder. The following DSM-IV comment is important. Individuals with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder share a tendency to be tough-minded, glib, superficial, exploitative, and unempathic. Sounds like a portrait of some of these leaders. However, a cautionary note. Only when antisocial personality traits are inflexible, maladaptive, and persistent and cause significant functional impairment or subjective distress do they constitute antisocial personality disorder. Now, I will just say that in the California and Colorado correctional systems, if someone has a history of antisocial acts, which can be documented down to age 15 or below, they will receive a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. And in fact, in our current prison system here in Colorado, there are about 17,800 people or so, maybe a few more, a few less than a year or two since I looked at the numbers. 40 to 50% of those individuals are also diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. So it's not rare. Cult leaders who are antisocial do not appear to be particularly troubled by the results of their lifestyles and actions on others. They give little appearance or concern about what's happening with them. Some do end up being incarcerated, such as Charles Manson, publicly exposed by the public press, such as in the case of David Burke and the Children of God. I'm going to wrap this up. The unethical and sometimes illegal and criminal behaviors of cult leaders are best classified among the common criminal behaviors normally observed in criminal offenders who also carry a DSM-IV diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Additionally, the privileges and honors normally extended to persons who hold positions of authority within religious groups should not be extended to those cult leaders who exploit, dominate, or abuse their followers. Now that's the conclusion of what I'm talking about. We need to make a very close cut on religious leaders and other leaders of groups. I would say that the criteria of the DSM-IV TR should be followed. What is a person doing? Not what are they saying or what are they saying in the press, but what are they actually doing? That's how we should basically look at these individuals. Cult leaders, by means of their antisocial actions, induce a variety of noxious psychological states and disorders in their followers. Give credence to the words spoken by another religious leader who said, "You shall know them by their fruits." Thank you very much. We're going to try to publish this paper on the web journal. And so if you've been trying to catch all of it, it'll be published at that point.